only rent a room. Now I own the whole flat. That's why it says here tenant to owner. So it means that from now onwards, Britain would have full control of the whole island, full control of Singapore, using British rule, using British framework whatsoever. No longer just a tenant renting a small place in Sydney. Will have more political certainty and stability. Because after so many years of negotiation, finally, Singapore has a confirmed status. I confirm you are under British. Because last time during Long Long, like, are you under Holland, are you under Britain, or would the local ruler wrap you there or something like that, you are not sure. Once you have certainty, it is always good. Good for people who want to live in Singapore, good for people who want to do business in Singapore. And besides, not only you have certainty, what is your confirmed governing authority? The confirmed governing authority was also quite powerful. Why? God Britain, the quite powerful guy during that era. So it added benefits to Singapore as well. Then in Southeast Asia in general, the treaty also brought more peace between the Dutch and British, because after signing this treaty, the two factions toned down their rivalry, toned down their competition. I think peace would always be welcome and preferred by any people living in that area. I've said before in some reading materials, and I think some reference note that what is important is what is the link and use of this history information. So what is this legacy having influence on the Singapore as of today? So the influence on Singapore state, I think the one is quite straightforward. Because of you signing this treaty, because of all this happening, it cemented British rule in Singapore for 140 over years. Yeah. If not, Singapore may not be under the British Empire. The state of Singapore could have moved in a different direction where we do not see as of now. So Singapore may not be what we see now, it will be something very different instead. Then I think legal framework, something that many of you may know. The current Singapore legal framework is based on British laws and systems. Although Singapore has some modification to the laws and framework to fit the local context, but many of the fundamental principles in our legal framework would be making reference to the British framework. For example, we adopt common law or we adopt case law, etc. If you're interested in law, you can know more. Then governance model, we have inherited the governance model used by Britain. If you have heard of this word before, the Westminster model. Basically, this model started from Britain. We will talk more about this in the future, but essentially, under this model, you will have a ceremonial or symbolic head of state. You will have a powerful head of government. You will have a parliamentary system, etc. In lesson 1, we have mentioned that EIC was given two roles, the role of the trader and the role of the ruler. And Singapore managed to benefit from the trader role of EIC and the ruler role of EIC. At that time, Britain as a whole in general was the forefront commercial power, industrial power, etc. due to the Industrial Revolution and other things. We have mentioned before that EIC occupied half of Wall Street at its prime years. So if Singapore can tap on to the global trading activities of EIC and the whole British Empire at large, we can understand how much benefit that can be reaped. As for the ruler role, because EIC was the theoretical governing authority in Singapore, we mentioned that EIC has ruler role. So or in theoretical or paper sense, the government in Singapore was created by EIC, not British government directly. So EIC had its armed forces to protect Singapore from pirates, from conflicts, etc. So all this stability, all this security would be attractive to people who want to come to Singapore to work, do business, or whatever. So in general, the strong economic power, strong military power, strong administrative power of Britain would help to bring confidence and credibility to people, which attracted more people to Singapore. Okay, now we will talk something about theory. The textbook mentions something about mercantile trade. Mercantile trade was a way of trading, a way of doing business that have been very popular during that time. So we will just give a rough idea what mercantile trade is. For the monarch or king or emperor to earn money, to be wealthy, to get rich, it was important to own as much bullion as possible. So when we talk of wealth of empire at the time, we are not talking about the wealth of country. We are really talking about the wealth of that monarch, that king. Because last time empire was owned by the king, not collectively by citizens. So for the king, for the government, for the monarch, for the emperor to be very rich, they will want to contribute as much bullion as possible. What is bullion? So bullion is like the stock of gold, stock of silver, stock of precious stones, stock of precious metals, etc. Because last time, the people were unlike us. Now we use symbolic notes and coins as money. Last time they really kept real gold, real silver and used that as so-called money. When you want to be rich, you must hold a lot of gold, a lot of silver, or whatever thing that they find valuable as the stock. Then how do you get as much bullion as possible? One way would be mercantile trade. Then what is the key feature of mercantile trade? One thing would be that you want to have much more exports than imports. Why? Because when you export things, you are selling things. When you are selling things, you will earn bullion from other places. When you import, you are buying things. When you are buying things, you are paying bullion to other people, other places. So you try to earn more money and pay less money if possible. Keep as much money within the empire as possible. So their main aim always trying to get more exports than then how do I get more things to sell, to export? I will try to find as many things at my home to sell within the empire. But I don't want to just sell that, I want to sell even much more. So they may get more goods or resources or whatever from elsewhere and sell as well. I also want to get raw materials from elsewhere so that I can produce goods at home to sell. Because I want to sell so many things, this would give more motivation for the empires to create colonies overseas because they can obtain resources from the colonies. The resources can be used to sell, or the resources can be used to be raw materials for production, and the final material can be used for selling. So whatever the case, I will sell more things, I will be more motivated to have more colonies. The colonies can also help to facilitate buying and selling activities. Because you want to sell a lot of things, right? You need to have buyer pool, seller pool, you need to have storeroom, all those things, right? Having the colonies will also help. And under this backdrop, the empires would also use ways to impose monopoly and exclude competitors. We have mentioned something to that effect before in lesson 1. So the empires would want to be the main player if not the only player to get the goodies from elsewhere and to sell in Europe or sell in whatever. So I try to make things difficult for my competitors. I try to prevent them to sell the same thing with them as me. I try to make them sell more expensive than me so that I can stand out and earn more money. We have talked about how the empires will discourage their competitors from using their nice ports or to disallow their competitors to use their nice ports. If they do not stop, they will perhaps charge high fees or make high restrictions or whatsoever. Then, because all these types of selling things, maybe I talk something about buying things. While you try to increase a lot of exports, the empires may also try to control imports. Of course, I need to import something, but I try to keep it to a minimum because I don't want to buy so many things and lose million. Therefore, the empires or the government may try to protect the local sectors from competition created by foreign imports. You want to prevent foreign imports from snatching business and competing for business with the local sectors. So maybe the government will have trade tariffs, trade quotas, or trade rules, or whatsoever to make things easier for local sectors, to make things harder for the foreign exports. Another key thing would be that in general, the empires will try to limit trade between others that does not involve themselves. Because if other people trade and I'm not involved, then I cannot earn a cut. I try to put myself inside as much as possible so that I can earn a cut from this. So if other, like even for my colony-wise, there are many restrictions on the colonies, such that the colonies may not be able to do business directly with other places. If they want to do business between the colony and other places, it should hopefully go through the empire somewhere, somehow. Because once you go through the empire, then the empire can be involved inside the process. Somehow then you can earn the cut from it through the buying and selling. Now we move on to the next theory, which is quite different from mercantile trade. This concept would be free trade. Towards the, I think the end of 18th century or what, I couldn't remember the exact date, 1784, 6 here. There's this economist called Adam Smith. He came up with this idea of free trade. It was very different from the mercantile trade idea being practiced in most of the places. Based on his idea, he says that trade shall lead to specialization and hence higher output, productivity, quality, and employment and income, blah, blah, blah. Based on his belief, he wanted to promote more trade, promote more people to trade, promote more freedom to trade. Instead of having the exclusive group of companies or empires having monopoly in doing trading. Because to him, if you can do this, this will increase the wealth of the overall population. His focus is to make the overall population rich, not the emperor or monarch rich. So if I can have free trade, I can have more trade, then I will have specialization and so on. Then more people will get rich, the whole citizenry, the whole population will get richer. He feels that trade shall lead to specialization. What does this mean? I try to illustrate with this example over here. Imagine that we have a world with no trade at all. So, because trade is about buying and selling things. So if you have a world without any buying or selling things, it means that you have to be very self-sufficient. Everything you need, you must buy, you must produce yourself, you must get it done yourself. So perhaps person A will have to grow on his own food, make his own clothes, build his own furniture. B must do the same, C must do the same. Every one of us must do the same. Because if we don't grow our food, get our own clothes, make our own furniture, no one will give it to us. Then no trade is very good actually. But everyone will be good and bad at something. So supposedly, A is a good tailor but a bad farmer. So he cannot grow food well, so he always grow hungry because the crops always die. But he has no choice, he has to keep growing because otherwise he would have no food. He is a good tailor. He can make very nice clothes. But he would not make a lot of clothes because he can only wear so many clothes. And there's no reason for him to make more clothes. And also he's very busy. He must go and grow food, make furniture, and do many other things. So that's about it. Similarly, B would have something good, something that he is good at and bad at. Same thing for C. Then, if you have trade, it will allow specialization. Because if we can buy and sell things, each of us can do what we are good at. We specialize in producing what we are good at. Then for the things that we are bad at producing, we can buy from others. So if A is a good tailor, he can make many clothes. B is a good farmer, he can produce a lot of food. Then A can sell clothes to B, B can sell food to A. You do what you are good at, I do what I am good at. What you are bad at, I sell it to you, vice versa. And with that, you can have higher output and higher productivity. Because when you are doing things that you are good at, you will do it faster and in greater amount. Okay? You can produce more, you can produce faster. And you can also have less wastage of resources. That piece of cloth, that guy will know how to cut properly, you don't waste the fabric. When you grow food, you don't waste the seed, you don't waste the land, you don't waste the fertilizer. And you are also not distracted by other things because you are quite focused on these few roles. Hence, there will be more productivity and output. Then it can also cascade to people buying more things, consume more things in greater amount and in faster speed. And because of this, the whole economy may become more energetic because you got a lot of activities, buying and selling activities, using of things and then changing of things. And with that, you will have more employment, more income, because you buy and sell more things. Yeah. So let's say for B, because B is a bad tailor, maybe all along this person only owns 2 pieces of clothes. Because the clothes made by him so ugly, he just made enough to wear, yeah, to survive life. But now he has trade. He may want to buy 5 pieces, 10 pieces, 20 pieces of clothes from A, of different pattern, different color, different occasions, right? You can do different things. So the consumption is get more. You consume more, you buy more, and hence the whole economy may be more vibrant. Is it good or not? That's another story, but it may cause more activity and more consumption. Under free trade, the extent of trade matters more. Instead of balance of trade. Just now we said that in mercantile trade you should have much more exports than imports. But for free trade, it does not matter. The extent is more important. Meaning, I want as much trade as possible. I want as much economic activity as possible. It is okay that maybe export is not much more than import. That one is okay. As long as I have a lot of economic activity, I got a lot of buying and selling activity, I have a lot of business activity, then the whole economy will be very vibrant, there will be a lot of exchanges, and that will be what free trade will be more interested in. It's not to insist the government to have much more exports than imports, but to create an overall environment with a lot of economic activity. Under this trade-off scheme of affairs, you can realize that the government may not grow richer. The people may grow richer by doing business, but the government may not be richer because using the old way of doing things, the government will want monopoly in trade, will want revenue from taxes. If you use free trade, then the government cannot use EIC, VOC to monopolize trade. The government cannot collect a lot of trade taxes for revenue. Then you may not have that much money from this. But you can see from another angle, a government cannot earn money from these areas. You can earn money from other areas. So the government can charge other kinds of taxes. The government can provide services with fees. The government can use other types of business models. It is not necessary that you need to earn money through monopoly of trade or through taxes of trade. Then, from another angle, you can also see that a government cannot only think about how much money the king has, or the monarch has, or the government has. To govern a whole empire, a whole country properly, you have to think of many other things. You have to think about the income of your citizens. You have to think about the jobs of your citizens. You have to think about learning skills from other countries, other places. You have to think about getting imports from other places because sometimes you really need the imports. You have to think about creating goodwill in other countries. If you really want to sell exports to other countries, you need to have this reciprocal kind of relationship whereby I allow you to sell things in my country so that others will be more willing to let you sell your things to their countries. So it's like a win-win, a mutual kind of relationship. You cannot say that I must sell things to you, but I refuse to let you sell things to me. The world does not work this way. Hence, there's a lot of things to consider when you are looking about trade, be it last time or today. Raffles made a radical decision to practice free trade in Singapore. It was radical, meaning very dramatic, very drastic, very different. Because at that time, most of the places in the world were practicing mercantile trade. So Singapore would be quite an odd one out. Raffles decided to have no taxes on trade, to make a business environment very free and open. You can do whatever you want most of the time in Singapore. This would be very different from what was being practiced in other places at that time. Why did Raffles make this decision? There's this line called the decision being made in consideration of local supply and market conditions. So you have to think about the local supply in Singapore and the market conditions in Singapore. Singapore is not a significant producer of goods. And Singapore did not have a lot of people on the island at that time. I think about less than 1,000 people. So if you don't have any goods, you don't have people there, Singapore would not have enough products to sell, will not have enough buyers, will not have enough sellers because there are no human beings. So essentially, it's like opening a shop with no items inside and no humans inside. So Raffles had to think of a way to stuff items inside and humans inside. Singapore at that time, I would say that she sort of lacked sufficient selling point as a trading center, lacked sufficient people to start off the settlement because the settlement was quite small, the island was still quite empty. Therefore, Raffles need to do something very different from others. So I must do something very different from other ports, other cities, other towns around Singapore. And free trade will be the choice. Where you have no taxes, the cost very low. When you hear free, everyone will be very happy. So it will attract many people here to Singapore because many of these people may experience very high taxes elsewhere. So low business costs, happy, they all come over here. You have open environment, free environment for business. This will also attract many people around because these people may experience a lot of restrictions, a lot of taxes, a lot monopoly kind of practice in other places that prevent them from doing more. So if you say that these ports have monopolistic practices, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, only EIC, VOC or what C can do that, you cannot do. But now in Singapore, whichever company, whichever person can buy and sell things that you like, people will be interested. So what would be the influence of this legacy on Singapore today? When you talk about trade taxes, I have to say that up till now, today, perhaps Singapore does not charge import taxes for over 99% of imports into Singapore. Any exceptions would be alcohol, tobacco, petroleum, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And when trade taxes or import taxes are imposed on these exceptions, it is not because Singapore wants to stifle free trade, but for other reasons. For example, for tobacco-wise, cigarettes are bad for health. So, but it's not so easy to ban cigarettes totally now. So maybe you charge high taxes, you make cigarettes more expensive. This may be a way to discourage people to go smoking too heavily. Yeah, so there are different reasons not related to free trade. Singapore also has very light rules, relatively light rules on business today. As compared to other countries, the rules for doing business in Singapore would be rather light and simple and not tedious. It is relatively easy in Singapore to set up companies, to transact finances, to manage employees, etc. So Singapore has a very business-friendly, businessman-friendly kind of culture right from the start until today. Something more about this word open. The start of free trade from Raffles at that time marked the start of Singapore having an open economy. I've said of open economy before in the previous lesson. I'll keep saying this. So what do you mean by being open? Open means very open, very free. So what do you mean by very free? Can be treated in many ways. So typically Singapore would have high freedom or low barrier in the flow of anything, many things, many things. So it's very easy for imports, exports, money, companies, people, whatever to flow in and out of Singapore. The government tries to make this simpler for businessmen in Singapore and abroad so that their enterprise can work more easily. The Singapore government always advocates free market forces. So when you are doing transactions in Singapore, it's based on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. You want to buy, then you have to endure the consequences. Similarly, if you want to sell, you have to endure consequences. But if the company can survive in this market, it will survive. If the company will die, let it die. The government would not really force its way to defy market forces and to change things. Transparency is also a way to show openness. They are very open in providing information for businesses. Okay? Singapore may be accused of being not so open for other things, but frankly speaking, when it comes to operational processes and business operations, Singapore could be considered as quite open. So Singapore would have a very open rules and regulations in making business, in doing business. So all the rules and regulations are publicly disclosed. You know that you should do this or do that to open a company. You know that you have to do this or do that to get a license. As compared to other countries, maybe you have uncertain rules or you may have other labor arrangements. Because for Singapore-wise, at least for operational processes from government, what you see is likely what you get. have the ingredients to prosper through mercantile trade if Singapore had chosen mercantile trade? I'll let you answer this question yourself, but perhaps I'll give some pointers on where you should look at. Mercantile trade or mercantilism, they are referring to similar things. So if you want to practice mercantilism, you need to have a lot of exports because you want exports more than imports. Does Singapore have enough exports, especially at the time? Think about it. Then to have a lot of exports, you must produce a lot of things, and then you must have a lot of manpower to produce those things. Does Singapore have enough of those things and those manpower, those resources, etc.? Does Singapore have a lot of agriculture or mining, etc.? If Singapore is unable to practice mercantile trade, Singapore cannot prosper in mercantile trade. So you must be able to do so. If you are not able to do so, it is not suitable for you to do. So I shall let you tidy up the points and then count the more complete answer. But we keep saying that Singapore is a trading settlement, there's a lot of buying and selling. If Singapore does not have a lot of exports, be it last time or present, then what does Singapore sell? What does Singapore do when it comes to trading? The main thing that Singapore does would be to import goods from other places and then re-export these goods to other places. So the exports are not produced by Singapore. The exports actually originate from somewhere. So I get something from somewhere and then I am the middleman, I re-export to somewhere else. So Singapore acts as a middleman, acts as an intermediary, acts as an agent. Then you may have another question. Why would people take this extra step to use Singapore as the intermediary? Why can't the buyer and seller transact directly? If the buyer and sellers buy and sell directly, you do not need the middleman. At least for that time, there may be some reasons like what we have seen in the previous slide. Singapore did not charge taxes for trade, right? So this buyer and seller from A and B may come from places with high taxes. So they may want to trade here to escape the taxes. Then just now we say that Singapore allow open business environment. So these people from A and B may come from places with a lot of restrictions in what to do and what to buy and sell. So they may make use of Singapore as a stepping stone instead. So different people would have different reasons. It says here, compare between mercantilism in the past and protectionism today. You may heard of this word protectionism quite often in the past few years, especially during the Trump administration. It still happens now. We will talk something about this current trade situation in future, but at present you may want to think about, is there any difference or similarity between what is being done in the past and what is being done now? If you are not sure what protectionism is, you read up, but at present, maybe I'm still a very rough idea. Protectionism is something like the government protecting local businesses from foreign competition by really limiting the amount of foreign imports in the country, or limiting the amount of foreign companies in the country, or limiting the amount of earnings of foreign companies in the country. So you try to make sure that your local businesses, your local sectors can have some privileges in surviving as compared to foreign companies and imports present in your country. So that is the rough idea. Going back to the olden days, so Singapore became a spice trade center. Singapore served both buyers and sellers from the east and the west. Many of them, understandably, would be attracted by the free trade policy. However, there's another policy that creates a nice complement to free trade policy. That would be the policy of free movement of people. So Raffles had this policy to allow people to move in and out of Singapore very freely. And when we say free, right, it can be in terms of many angles, like the direction of movement. Free to go in, free to come out. You can stay as long as you want. There's freedom in movement for whatever kind of people. So the government did not really question those people as to what are their origins, what are their backgrounds, what are their motives for coming to Singapore. This freedom of movement would be important because at that time, I've said before, Singapore was rather empty with less than 1,000 people. We need to build up population in the island so that you can have more vibrancy and more work, more healthy society and economy, etc. You need people to be buyers, you need people to be sellers, you need people to do work, you need people to settle down. So how do you get human beings? This will be an important item. How would this service to East and West and such policies may influence on the growth of Singapore today? So I think we always hear Singapore being global hub for this and that, right? So I think as of now, Singapore still plays an important part in serving both East and West and bridging both East and West by being the global trading hub, global financial hub, global transport hub, global manufacturing hub, global regional HQ setup hub, or whatever hub that you can think of. So it's a collective gathering place, central place for people around the world from East and West. Since we're talking about people doing business in Singapore, we'll talk a bit more about specific groups. One group will be the British private traders. So it's some information over here you can read on your own. The key thing to mention about this part will be that you can have private traders from Britain or elsewhere doing business here, doing work here. Why? Because Singapore was practicing free trade. Because free trade was practiced, trading was not monopolized by EIC. Other places, once you have the EIC, VOC, or whatever, see that state-owned enterprise would be the key company holding monopoly for trading in that place. But although you have EIC in Singapore, but Raffles practice free trade. So you can have private traders, be it from Britain or from other places to trade here. But if this traders wanted to go elsewhere, it may be more difficult because they may face more monopolistic practices from respective empires. Then the next thing to talk about would be the Chinese and Peranakan traders nearby. The keyword is nearby. During the initial years of Singapore, modern Singapore, the local born Chinese and Peranakan traders would play a key part as well. At this time, you would not have that many Chinese from China directly. They will come later because of the migrational rules and other considerations, which we may touch on subsequently. But at this time, when you have Chinese traders, Peranakan traders coming in, they are mostly from nearby regions, especially those from British rule territories like Penang and Malacca. If you know, Peranakans would be your Babas and Nyonyas with mixed blood. So they are mixed blood from Chinese Malay descent or Chinese Indonesian descent or Chinese native descent around this region. These people are prominent because they acted as the middleman between the British and the natives. The British traders or government were here doing business, setting up settlement, but they are not familiar with local language, local practices, local networks. Similarly, the natives will not be familiar with British language, British networks, British practices. So these people would act as a bridge. They are familiar with both sides. They are familiar with British, they are familiar with natives. Why? Because they grew up here, they were local born. They were English educated. And many of them are quite well off, so they studied in Britain. Therefore, they can act as middlemen, maybe like interpreters, liaisons, or collaborators to allow all the barriers faced by British and natives during the process of doing business or communication or governance or whatsoever. The British also like to use these people to advance their economic interests because they are familiar with doing trade. They are experienced traders. They are also familiar with handling modern currency. We'll talk about modern currency in the next lesson. So they know how to handle notes, coins, things like that, not just primitive tokens. They know how to handle banks and other things like that. They are also more subsistence driven or pragmatic. In other words, they are willing to do things for money. They are more willing to do things for money. So it's easy to get them to collaborate in terms of business. As compared to the natives were engaging more in agriculture and fishing, etc. So their forte was not in trade but something else. And also the British sometimes may felt that they are more laid back or free-spirited, so they preferred to use Chinese and Peranakan traders for business collaboration instead. From the social perspective, some of these rich traders are important because they were generous in donating money to help the society. So they may donate money to build schools, build utilities, to provide medical service, to help the poor, etc. Why is this important? Because at that time, the British government, the EIC government, wasn't that active and interested in helping the ground people, the common folk well-being. So to help the ground people or to help the common folk, you really need community self-support. And these people would be useful when it comes to providing funding and expertise. People being the most important resource, this sounds as a cliche statement, but this is really true. You really a lot of human beings in Singapore, and human beings are the key resource that will allow Singapore to flourish from past to present. So here are just some examples of where these people come from, especially during the early days of Singapore. What would be the influence of these legacy on the population profile and population behavior today. I'll say that because of these different migration patterns from all around the world, the end result led to how Singapore development, Singapore nationalization, Singapore culture, Singapore lifestyle are being shaped today. How we live, play, speak, like or the like, a lot of all these aspects are inherited or influenced by who were the ones here right at the start and along the process. And the migration patterns also have an impact in leading to the specific percentage of ethnic group distribution in Singapore. Like now you have how many percentage of Chinese, how many percentage of Malays, how many percentage of Indians, etc. This distribution within the population profile would be affected by the earlier migration patterns as well. And because of this migration patterns, it also may allow people in Singapore to be more open to Eastern and Western influences. Of course, it will also bring challenge to Singapore as to how to make the diverse people bind and live peacefully on the same planet. Now we talk about something else on geography. So geography also helped to catalyze, helped to promote growth of Singapore at that time. Earlier on we say PIC roles have impact, future policy, free movement policy have impact. Now we talk about something else. This one is straightforward. First, I think many of you know the location of Singapore is quite good since the past until today. So Singapore is like falling along the shortest road between East and West. So if someone wants to travel between East and West, or someone wants to travel between India and China, Singapore will be a nice turnaround, transit point, transport stop, or whatsoever. And because of her position, she can also benefit from the monsoon patterns. I'm not sure whether you are familiar with monsoon patterns. If you still remember your secondary school geography lessons, if I repeat again, so what happens is that in the olden days, transport via sea would use sailing ships. So sailing ships would depend on wind. You need wind to move. Monsoons would be periods of strong winds in a certain direction. For Singapore-wise, the key monsoons to take note will be the northeast monsoons and the southwest monsoons. So there are some words over here to show the direction of the monsoons, but if I illustrate using the map here, during the season of northeast monsoon, the wind will blow from this direction to this direction. So this may be the time whereby people from China would want to come to Southeast Asia, or people from Singapore would want to go to Spice Island, or people from Singapore would want to travel to India. Conversely, during the season of southwest monsoon, the wind would blow from a different direction, so people may go from the opposite end. So this may be a time whereby you want to travel from Singapore to China, from Spice Island to Singapore, so on and so forth. Therefore, depending on where the trader wanted to go, the trader will wait for the right monsoon and set sail. You have to wait for the right wind direction to continue moving. Therefore, at that time, monsoons would also be known as trade winds. And Singapore would be considered as strategically located because you are at the crossover point to benefit from all this direction of monsoon. reiteration and addition to what we have said about the roles of Singapore in trading. So to repeat, Singapore would serve many kinds of traders from different places, from nearby places, from China, from Western world, etc. You will have Singapore acting as a middleman, a medium or intermediary in trade. I've shown this diagram just now. The main thing that Singapore will do would be that Singapore would import something from one place and then we export this thing, the goods, to another place. By being the middleman, the ports in Singapore will try to help in some way as a middleman. So maybe you will do some packing, sorting, warehousing. So perhaps the goods will be imported from somewhere and then being packed or sorted or warehoused or traded in Singapore and then re-exported, re-transported to the final intended destination. This practice or this approach of importing things, then re-exporting things is known as on-tree port trade. So please do not be confused between the two terms, free trade and on-tree port trade. Free trade means that you can do trade freely. On-tree port trade means that you import something, then you re-export it. They are different things. So do not get the notions confused. On-tree port trade was an important economic pillar for Singapore at that time. As for today, Singapore is still highly involved in on-tree port trade. So if you look at the trade statistics of Singapore, you always have this column re-export, 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 because we are very well known to be middlemen or intermediaries. But the difference would be that we have progressed further. So last time, maybe the main thing that Singapore would do as a middleman would be to pack something, stock something, warehouse something, or allow some trading. But now Singapore will try to go beyond. For one, Singapore would have a higher diversity of goods being traded through this means. So you have more types of goods being traded through on-tree port trade. Secondly, Singapore would have more sophistication in function. I'm not just doing packing and sorting like a postman. I get something in and then I give something out. I try to do something more value add. So Singapore may try to process the raw goods into something more lucrative and re-export. You will see this later on again in future lessons. So instead of just taking the raw item and then throw it to the next person, once I receive the raw item, I try to make it something more valuable, more lucrative, then I re-export to the next counterpart. Or Singapore may provide higher value services like finance, logistics, etc. that other countries or other ports may not be good at. Be it for Singapore last time or Singapore today, if you want to be a middleman, you must always try very hard to provide high value add, strong value add, more value add. Because for any agent, any kind of agent, any kind of middleman, if you do not provide value add, the customers would change agent one day. Or the customers would decide to transact directly between the buyers and sellers. It's like us, right? If we think that property agent is not useful and too expensive, we will find our means to buy and sell houses ourselves. We will not use the agent. Same for insurance agent. So any kind of agent, be it on individual end or on the country perspective, you need to keep finding new ways to value add and to show that your presence is useful. Otherwise, people will just throw you out. So this is a big headache that Singapore will have to think about forever. Now we talk a bit about story on Singapore, on British and China. Okay, let's see. Remember from the first lesson, we have said that Britain was very interested to do trade with China because Britain wanted to have new business avenues, especially after the trade in India was giving lesser returns as a result of the entry of private traders and other factors. So Britain entered the China market and tried to do more trading with China. China was a producer of nice goodies like tea and silk. So Britain would like to get these goodies from China and then sell them back at Europe or elsewhere. What happened was that it came to a point whereby Britain was buying a lot of things from China, buying a lot of these goodies, tea and silk from China. So Britain was importing a lot from China. But at the same time, China was not buying a lot of things from Britain because China was not really interested in what Britain was selling. So you have this situation whereby Britain was having more imports from China than exports to China. If you remember mercantile trade, this would be something not good, right? Because mercantile trade, I want more exports than imports. In this case, from the British perspective, Britain was having more imports than exports when it comes to transaction with China. So this is not nice. If you follow the mercantile trade concept. Just to give some more ideas on terminology, because you may see this in your readings and also in the news. When you say trade balance is something like the value of exports minus value of imports. So when you have more exports than imports, this value would be positive, and we will call it a trade surplus. When you have more imports than exports, this value would be negative, and hence we will call it a trade deficit. Applying this definition to the case of Britain and China, you will have Britain suffering a trade deficit against China. Trade deficit would not be a happy outcome for Britain. So Britain wanted to close the gap, to make things balance out. Because now it is a bit imbalanced. A lot of imports, but very little exports. I want to make them more balanced. Can I sell more things to China? So Britain was thinking of what to sell more things to China. What can Britain sell? What would China want? After thinking and thinking and thinking, the final outcome is I will sell opium. Why? Because China did not have much opium. And opium smoking is addictive. Once you are addicted, you want to keep having more. So you will have a continuous source of business. It will not stop because they will keep buying from you and buying more and more from you. Because of this, tables would turn. It became the opposite. After the heavy selling of opium, now the situation became such that China was importing more from Britain instead of exporting to Britain. So now it is the turn of China to become unhappy, because now China would be the one having trade deficit. But apart from the economic aspect of trade deficit, you would know that opium smoking would have serious problems in health and social terms. So China would want to stop this more strongly. So in the end, China decided to cut British imports and to ban opium sales. Of course, you can imagine British would be very unhappy. So China and Britain will have conflict, they would have arguments, they will have aggressions, blah, 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 blah. You have the Opium War. I'm trying to oversimplify the story because that is not the focus of this part. The focus is the impact on Singapore. Yeah. So what happened was, Opium War came. Unfortunately, China was at the losing end, and she had to concede with certain concessions. One of the concessions would be to open up more ports for Britain to trade, and also to allow more British and Western penetration. If you remember the first lesson, I've said that in the early days, Guangzhou was the main point of entry for foreigners via sea travel. But because of Opium War, many more ports were opened. So after the first Opium War, you have Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, Shanghai being opened, apart from Guangzhou. After second Opium War, you have many more ports being opened. Too many to list here. If you want to know the exact long list, you can Google yourself. Basically, the takeaway message would be many ports were opened for British trade and Western penetration. This would have impact on Singapore, because due to this opening of ports, China would have more trade with Britain. China would have more trade with other places. And this more trading would cascade down to Singapore, given that Singapore is a booming British trading center, given that Singapore is a popular transport point for East and West. So you get the contingent effect of more business, more economic activity. So it actually helped to boost the trading and economic activity of Singapore due to the secondary impact. Due to the Opium Wars, China also ended up allowing Chinese to exit China through certain open ports and to work in British colonies. In the past, the migration rules in China was stricter, so it may be harder for Chinese to leave China, or there were less people leaving China. Because of this opening up, you will have more people from China exiting through these open ports to go elsewhere in the world. And the elsewhere includes Singapore. So from then on, that was the time whereby Singapore saw a big increase in Chinese migration. You have a lot more Chinese migrants coming in from then on. You'll see much more about this in future lessons. So this migrants help to provide manpower, especially for brown labor work. And besides that, due to this huge increase in Chinese migration to Singapore, it eventually changed the population profile of Singapore, whereby Singapore eventually have the majority being Chinese from then on. We'll talk more about population changes in future lessons. islands were major hinterland for modern Singapore in the first 50 years. So a lot of the trading being done were focused on spices. Of course, there are other things, but spices will be a mainstay. If you look at the dictionaries, there are few definitions of hinterland. For this course, for this module, we will use this specific definition. Hinterland is a land, okay? A land that supplies the port center or city center with resources and goods essential for economic growth and so on. So Spice Islands supply spices useful for economic growth. So they were hinterland. Singapore will see quite a number of changes in hinterland in the future. You will take note of this box in future lessons as well. Singapore does not own a substantial internal hinterland because she is small with limited resource capacity, limited production capacity. So she always had to depend on hinterlands elsewhere, outside Singapore. Therefore, Singapore is very import heavy, meaning that Singapore relies heavily on imports from last time till today. When you rely a lot on imports, you are at the mercy of the world. Anything happens to the world, you are very scared that your imports would be disrupted. So this would be a lifelong limitation of Singapore that she has to think of how to address. Then when we come back to this first 50 years of Singapore, you can see that I think over the first 50 years, the trade activity increased by about 5 times. Yeah. When we look at data here or similar nature, it is more meaningful to look at the total instead of imports and exports. Because Singapore practices free trade and on-trade trade. Remember, just now we say when you practice free trade, it's not so important to know whether exports more than imports or not. It's more important to see total activity, the total vibrancy of the economy. And when you practice on-trade trade, right, a lot of your import will end up export, so you are double counting. I think in the current era, if you look at Singapore statistics, you will see Singapore government having different columns. They will specify that this will be exports from Singapore, this will be re-exports from elsewhere, because you do not want to confuse people. There are also other global events affecting the development of Singapore at that time. One thing would be the introduction of steamships. So when you have steamships, you use steam to run, so you are no longer dependent on wind. So you do not need to wait for the wind from the monsoons anymore. Ships can travel more freely anytime they want, provided that they can find fuel to produce steam. Once you can find fuel, you have more flexibility on when you want to travel and how long you want to travel. When you have more freedom on when to travel and how long to travel, obviously the amount of traveling would increase, the amount of trading would increase as well. Then during this period, the Suez Canal was also open for everyone to use. Suez Canal is somewhere here in the Middle East. So if I extrapolate to the diagram on the right here, you have a canal over here. So in the past, if you want to travel between Europe and Asia, you need to go one big round along Africa. Now with Suez Canal, you can have a shortcut. The distance would be greatly decreased. The estimate would be that the distance between Europe and India will be reduced by 40% in travel distance. Yeah. So 40% would be quite a lot. Yeah. So So when you can travel faster, of course, you can reach your destination faster. You can also save more costs. Yeah, so everything will be useful when it comes to doing trade. You have shorter travel distance, you have shorter travel time, you have less travel cost. As of today, Suez Canal is still a very important waterway for the world, and many ships going through Singapore would pass by Suez Canal as well. A bit more on steamships. We said steamships require steam to run, therefore you need to use coal to boil water to produce the steam in order for the ships to run. Because of this, fuel will be very important. The ships will require constant replenishment of coal. Otherwise, they cannot move. Singapore was a very lucky trip. During the times of sailing ships, Singapore was located at a favorable location where she can benefit from monsoon patterns. During the times of steamships, she was also located at a favorable location where she can benefit from bunkering. Bunkering means refueling. Singapore was one of the designated coal depots along the shipping road in the region. Meaning that I'm the fuel station. If you need coal, you will pass by me to replenish coal. This allows more ships to come to Singapore. This encourages more ships to come to Singapore because they need to refuel. This is the stopping point you have to cut in order to get the coal and to have the fuel to continue moving. So we were lucky that we are being one of the designated coal depots. And fast forward to today, Singapore is still heavily involved in the bunkering business. Just that perhaps the type of fuel may have changed. Now we are more on oil and gas instead of coal. And if you know, Singapore is the largest and most important bunkering port in the world. That's why you have a lot of oil and gas MNCs setting up operations in Singapore. We will talk about how tin and rubber booms would catalyze the growth and development of Singapore later on in lesson 4. Right, with that, we can take a 2 minutes break. We will come back at around 15